This video is brought to you by Keeps. What up guys, Greg here, and today we're talking about the USA. Whether you like superhero stories or not, you might have noticed a trend on TV that could be best described as take a superpowered paragon of justice, but then make them real bad. That might mean refashioning Superman into a murderous psychopath named Homelander in The Boys, or recasting Captain America as a vengeful ghoul in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, in both cases, these heroes are symbols of America itself. But what we think is interesting is that while they ask the same question, what are we going to do about America? They each offer a drastically different answer. We'll explain in this Wisecrack Edition, Captain America versus Homelander. Is America hopeless? And major spoilers ahead for both the MCU and The Boys. But before we continue, I want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Keeps. Keeps is a subscription service that makes it easier and more affordable for men to treat their hair loss. Let's be honest. For a lot of guys, having a fresh haircut is as important to their style as their clothes or sneakers. So if you start noticing more hairs than usual in the shower drain, it can feel pretty scary. And this is the reality for 2 out of 3 guys by the age of 35. But the good news is that with Keeps, you no longer have to accept hair loss. And with the right plan, you can prevent hair loss before you start Googling discount hair pieces. When you sign up with Keeps, you'll have a consultation with one of their doctors, and from there, you'll be able to get FDA-approved prescription or over-the-counter medication shipped directly to your door. You'll then receive shipments from Keeps every 3 months, so you'll never have to worry about waiting in line at the pharmacy. You'll also have access to your Keeps doctor, so you can ask any questions you might have once you get started. Find out why Keeps has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors, and why hundreds of thousands of men trust Keeps for their hair loss prevention. If you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/wisecrack or click the link in the description to receive 50% off your first order. That's keeps.com/wisecrack. And now, back to the show. Now we're going to focus on 2 characters today, Homelander and Captain America, especially the John Walker variety. The former is a very clear dunk on classic Superman, while the latter is just a bargain bin Steve Rogers.
What the hell?
Now, recent iterations of both the Superman and Cap have variously been outlaws or just sad boys, right? However, for most of their publication histories, they've been both exemplars of truth, justice, and a certain vision of the American spirit. And both the Falcon and the Winter Soldier and the Boys imagine, well, the opposite of that. This has led some commenters to call John Walker a knockoff Homelander. And whether or not you agree with that assessment, it is true that both shows similarly attack American militarism, and in the process, both get to the question, what's so great about America anyway? To figure that out, we have to introduce a term you may remember from high school history class, American Exceptionalism. It's the idea that among all the countries in the world, one of them is the very, very best, and it's the United States of America. Modern politicians often tie this notion to the Puritan John Winthrop, who preached to some Boston-bound settlers that they will create a shining city upon a hill with the whole world's eyes upon them. And we all know how that turned out. But jokes aside, no character quite embodies American exceptionalism like Captain America. In fact, the character was actually created as war propaganda in 1940. His first issue shows him sucker punching Adolf Hitler nearly a full year before America entered World War II. This was a blatant call to arms to step up and take on the Nazis at a time when many Americans favored non-intervention. So since his conception, the character has been a stand-in for a particular brand of American exceptionalism that sees the US of A as a fighter against tyranny and a defender of liberty. Fittingly, in the MCU, even when Steve Rogers is at odds with the US government, he still embodies this American ideal. Far from being a blindly loyal mascot for the military-industrial complex, Steve confronts the growth of the surveillance state in The Winter Soldier.
Shield's been compromised, you said so yourself. Hydra grew right under your nose and nobody noticed.
And its regulatory overreach in Civil War.
Tony, you chose to do that. If we sign this, we surrender our right to choose. What if this panel sends us somewhere we don't think we should go? What if there's somewhere we need to go and they don't let us? We may not be perfect, but the the safest hands are still our own.
He may be a patriotic soldier, but when he smells bullshit, he calls it out. This separation of the character of Captain America from the institutions of the United States exemplifies an idea of the American spirit as something that goes beyond the government itself. And this is a somewhat different take on American exceptionalism. The idea is even when the government is messing up, America still rips. But this idea that superheroes like Steve can embody what is exceptional about America has come under a lot of scrutiny lately. Shows like The Boys and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier have started to ask, is this exceptionalism actually a fantasy? Let's start with The Boys and the figure of Homelander. Like Steve Rogers, he's a serum-made super dude who has become a symbol of American patriotism. And in his character, we see a much darker and more cynical view of American exceptionalism. One in which the special and unique nature of this country is its military prowess and its ability to obscure murder and racism behind a big pretty flag. Homelander serves as an interesting counterpoint to Captain America, because rather than being a character independent of his origins, he is indivisible from the institutions that created him. He doesn't even have an alter ego like Steve Rogers does. He is Homelander through and through.
Hey, is that your secret identity?
Mm-hmm.
Charming.
Thanks.
Yeah, I gave up on mine. Oh, a long time ago now.
Despite his outwardly noble persona, his only purpose is to further the interests of Vault International. He uses this faux patriotism as a cover for Vault's crimes against humanity. This draws pretty obvious parallels to some American military actions abroad, which critics might say are motivated less by justice and more by corporate interests and global capitalism. In this context, American exceptionalism becomes a thin veneer for trying to nab a lucrative military contract to fight the very same super terrorists that Vault created.
And now, we have villains all over the globe that only we can fight.
Not unlike the American military saving the world from the Taliban and other Afghani militants that they just so happened to have supplied with weapons just a few decades earlier. Homelander and Vault less represent an America losing its way,
You know the drill. He shot at us first.
and more seem like the logical conclusion of a country that spent the last century backing brutal dictatorships, funding terrorists, or just accidentally bombing a critical pharmaceutical plant. In this case, the thing that America is an exception to is international humanitarian laws.
All these ingrates realize I killed that asshole for them. What do they think saving America means anyway?
The Boys thus cast a dark light on anyone claiming to be the good guy while unilaterally doing whatever they want. Peek behind the curtain and it will almost get exponentially more disgusting. But is this just about a few dudes giving superhumans a bad name? That seems to be the line taken by Marvel in the form of John Walker. He thinks he's the good guy going around knocking heads in the name of America. He's a brash, impulsive soldier who acts with absolute authority. His only goal is to accomplish his mission, no matter the consequences. This blind loyalty combined with a dangerous amount of power results in a disastrous outcome in which his symbolic shield is literally stained with blood for the whole world to see. Yeah, the show is not subtle in its symbolism. Dig even deeper, and a lot of his actions seem vaguely reminiscent of the way the American military has treated the Middle East. You know, like his desire to interrupt a civilian funeral.
We'll move in fast, take her by surprise.
No, I want to talk to her alone. I'm not losing her again.
Except presumably using his fists instead of a drone. The show also hints at mysterious, horrible things he and his partner had to do while serving in Afghanistan.
We both know that the things that we had to do in Afghanistan to be awarded those medals felt a long way from being right.
This characterization raises a lot of questions like, was Steve Rogers the only person worthy of the title Captain America? And was the patriotic narrative that Steve helped promote false from the start?
The danger with people like him, America's super soldiers, is that we put them on pedestals.
Watch your steps, Zemo.
They become symbols, icons, and then we start to forget about their flaws.
At the same time, The show sees Sam Wilson confront a lot of the ugly history that Steve Rogers never did. He learns how racism in the military has devastated the lives of other super soldiers, like Isaiah Bradley, a black Korean War veteran who was an early guinea pig in the American government's super soldier experiments. Bradley flat out rejects the idea that America is a bastion of justice or equality, telling Sam,
"They will never let a black man be Captain America. And even if they did, no self-respecting black man would ever want to be."
So both Homelander and John Walker represent pretty similar criticisms of American exceptionalism, namely that this beacon of liberty stuff enables America to do some really horrible shit. But where these franchises differ is in the solutions they offer to those criticisms. Both shows attempt to answer the question of whether the image of America as a city on a hill can be salvaged from its history of, well, being the opposite. The Boys takes a cynical perspective using Homelander to paint a wholly irredeemable picture of American exceptionalism.
If you do that, I'll destroy everything and everyone.
Great. As long as everyone sees what a fucking monster you are.
The show's second season even explores and dramatizes the dark, oft-forgotten history of America's involvement with Nazi scientists when it reveals that Compound V was actually developed for Hitler to help achieve his vision of a master race.
We are in a war for the culture.
Fittingly, fellow superhero Stormfront anoints Homelander as the leader of her very Nazi-esque movement.
And you will be the man who will lead us.
A role he proudly embraces. Of course, in the real world, there is, to my knowledge, no Compound V. However, there was plenty of friendly cooperation between American scientists and politicians and their Nazi peers around other master race business, namely in the study of eugenics. And that spirit of cooperation manifested in partnerships between American businessmen and the Third Reich. The point is, the narrative of escaped Nazi creates American company to further his white supremacist goals isn't that far off from the actual history. Now, in The Boys, Homelander may not be a full-blooded Nazi, but his own values don't seem to be too incompatible with Stormfront's.
This used to be a beautiful country.
Remember? One nation under God. Remember? Right before these godless, inhuman supervillains started pouring across our borders.
On the other hand, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier offer a much more muddled take on American exceptionalism. On the one hand, Zemo does compare the Avengers to the Nazis.
She's a supremacist. The very concept of a super soldier will always trouble people. It's that warped aspiration that led to Nazis, to Ultron, to the Avengers.
However, he also assigns this moniker to Carly Morgenthau, leader of the Flag Smashers, who wants to distribute that power to refugees and the less fortunate. The show is not so subtly arguing that desperate groups of people who resort to terrorism might be, well, kind of Nazi adjacenty. So how does each show propose we divorce American exceptionalism from its history of destructive wars and racism while pushing it towards its promise of liberty and equality? In The Boys, Huey and Starlight work to expose the truth about Compound V to the media in the hopes that it will cause Vault to be shut down or at least help the Supes be reined in. But this results in little more than thoughts and prayers from the mega corporation. The show even makes a point to highlight the way that these attempts at reform can be co-opted by the very institutions they are critiquing. For example, Stormfront uses the outrage at Vault International to further her white nationalist agenda, and Congresswoman Newman makes a name for herself by holding a public hearing about Vault and the Supes' abuse of authority, only to be revealed as a shady Supe herself. Once again, the show highlights the dark side of American exceptionalism. Here, it shows how powerful institutions can negate any attempt at meaningful reform or genuine accountability.
Doesn't matter what we do, nothing changes. Nothing ever changes or gets better.
But the Falcon and the Winter Soldier tells a different story. Caught between a state that routinely abuses its power and a group that wants to abolish state power altogether, Sam chooses a middle path. He eventually accepts the responsibility bestowed on him, but only after he comes face to face with America's shameful history. And while he helps stop the Flag Smashers from carrying out their plan to kill a whole bunch of political leaders, he also admonishes those same leaders for abusing their power and for branding the Smashers as terrorists. The show seems to conclude that American exceptionalism can be reclaimed as long as we're willing to reconcile with our history and hold our leaders accountable.
The only power I have is that I believe we can do better.
Sam's take on American exceptionalism is basically that those in power need to remain humble and listen to the voices of the oppressed and disenfranchised, lest they become nationalistic robots. And this take leaves Sam with a foot still seemingly inside the American military state. And that's one more foot than Steve had in it before he did a Back to the Future so he could slow dance to terrible music and not have the internet anymore. But is Sam being overly optimistic? After all, John Walker is still being recruited by some shady organization, and Sharon Carter, aka the Power Broker, is back at the CIA where she's bound to wreak more havoc. The mechanisms of the old American exceptionalism, one based on unchecked military power and misplaced moral authority, are still operating. Still, Sam remains straight down the middle, certain that America has simply lost his way without Steve Rogers, and that it's up to people like him, people willing to compromise with their enemies, to steer it back on course.
We built this country, bled for it. I'm not gonna let anybody tell me I can't fight for it.
Clearly, both franchises are asking what American exceptionalism means and how the world should respond to it, but they come to drastically different conclusions. And we'd be remiss not to point out that both are produced by two of the largest corporations in America, both of whom have contracts with the US government. So maybe the only thing America is truly exceptional at is irony. And media franchises?
Our latest film, G-Men World War, just grossed shy of $1.7 billion worldwide.
But what do you guys think? Is America more of a Steve Rogers or a Homelander, or one of these other Captain Americas? Let us know in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support. Hit that subscribe button like you're jabbing yourself with super serum, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching, and let freedom ring. Peace.